you for that wonderful introduction, Matthias. I think he played it up a little too much, but that's okay. So, this is called The Challenges and Rewards of F# Growth. I'm kind of interested in giving this talk because pretty much most talks that I've given while employed at Microsoft have been about, oh, get started with F#, why you should use F#, get started with F#, why you should use F#. And I enjoy giving those because they're useful and they help with F# adoption, I think. But they're like my entire life and working hours are not spent, get started with F#, why you should use F#, get started with F#, so this is going to be talking, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about some of the stuff that I sort of think about from a day-to-day basis, some of the challenges that I've come across over the past few years that I've been working in this capacity as a PM for F#. PM, just 2 letters, stands for Program Manager. I neither am required to program for a living nor manage for a living, so the title is a title. But hopefully you'll get an idea of some of the things that I think about, some of the challenges that we as the team overall face, and some of the things that we've tried to do to sort of face those challenges, and maybe give you a better idea as to why we do the things we do, and as we do things in the future, sort of why we have done that. So when I talk about growth, there's really kind of 4 things, right? The first is just more users, right? Make number more go big, right? Just big charts, make sure that they're going up. You gotta have that happen. That's how it works in the business world. But then there's also more to it than just getting more users, right? Like, a lot of people view growth as more tooling capabilities. A lot of them view it as more language capabilities. And a lot of people sort of view growth as like, oh, is the community growing? Are there more things that I can use in the open source world? Are there more packages up on NuGet and so forth? And so, this would be like a 4-hour talk if I were to talk about all of this. But I'll give you kind of a brief sort of overview of so more users, kind of one of the main challenges there is that you've got to face industry norms. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I'm sure you all are well aware that F# is not a C-style programming language, and the majority of programmers use C-style programming languages, so that's quite a challenge. More tooling capabilities, the largest challenge has been we want to say, okay, everything needed to be modernized, and then just the rabbit hole that ensued of just all sorts of challenges has been quite interesting. More language capabilities, I think in my mind, the largest challenge there is how do you innovate while remaining stable, which sort of feels strange, right? You would think, oh, if you're stable, you're not changing. And if you're innovating, you're not necessarily being stable. And it's kind of contradictory, and that creates contradictions in my own head and makes me seem like a crazy person every once in a while. So that's quite a challenge. And the more community business is just how do we promote the work of others that are not working at Microsoft and do it in a way where we're not giving them the Microsoft kiss of death, right? Like, how do we promote, say, Fable without saying, ooh, I like that. That's ours. No. That's challenging because it's depending on who you talk to and depending on who your audience are, you need to be very, very careful with how you promote something, because you may promote something that somebody else doesn't want to see promoted, and it's there's lots of fun challenges there. But anyways, I'm not going to talk about all that. I'm really just going to focus on sort of the challenges and sort of some of the nice things that have happened with trying to get more users to use F#, and some of the challenges and things that we've seen that I think are quite positive in terms of trying to get more tooling capabilities. Perhaps in a future talk I would talk about language stuff and sort of try to synthesize the viewpoints that Don and I and others have about sort of where to go, but I don't have forever. So, more users, make number more go big. There's a little grab bag of various challenges with this one. Counting correctly is hard. It's very hard for a large number of reasons. Like, you could turn off telemetry and I can't, like, you're not going to show up. And so like if 200,000 people turned off telemetry, that's 200,000 people that cannot be counted, and 200,000 people that you cannot say, oh, are using F# because you can't tell for sure. And there are various industries, like say banking, where a lot of developers are completely cut off from the internet. There's nothing even, like there's no way for any information to go anywhere, except for whatever their local area network is. And so there's sort of this ambient group of people who are using things, and we honestly, like, at least in my case, I don't know the size and shape of that, and that's a challenge. Second one, interpreting numbers and trends is also, I think that's even more difficult, because it's so easy to have in your head what you think you're trying to measure, what you're going after, but then you measure something and you see a particular trend. It's either good or bad or neutral, whatever, and then you associate that with what you have in your head when you're not necessarily measuring the same thing, right? I'll have a couple of slides showing a few like Google Trends things. Well, if you go, well that correlates with kind of what I think people are doing, like, they're active programmers and like Google is capturing that. Well, no, it's capturing search information based off of what they determine to be fitting a particular bucket, in this case being a programming language. And that measurement can go up or down for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with programmer interest and programmer activity. And those sorts of things are very difficult to keep in mind, and it's very easy to fall into the trap, especially if you get a graph that looks good, to see it and then say, yes, things are going well. And it's also easy if you see a graph that looks bad and say things are going bad. That also, coincidentally, makes you a lot more motivated to prove that maybe perhaps you haven't been looking at the correct thing. Also, writing documentation is really hard. It takes a long time. There's sort of a high bar for getting things merged, especially when you have Myra Wenzel on the .NET Docs team reviewing every single pull request that you send her way. If you try to promote something, there's a risk of stifling other assets. That's something that's challenging, right? If I were to say, F# programmers need to use a different library other than Elmish, right? That would be insane, right? Because as the community is sort of coalescing around Elmish and sort of saying this is the thing that we want to use with Fable, well, that would be silly, and I think that's sort of an obvious example of something not to do. But there are oftentimes more subtle cases, and so you got to be very careful when we're doing that. And then SEO is difficult. I went to college. I did not study SEO at all, and then I found that I needed to learn how to do some form of SEO to be any kind of successful at my job. So that was interesting. I wish I learned that one much earlier on. And finally, what people find interesting is not static. This is just like, it may be easy to evangelize a particular use case of F# for a period of time, but then if you try it again a year later, it may not be so successful. And you go, okay, well, why is this not very successful? And the answer is, who knows? But maybe just people aren't as interested in it anymore, and you need to go and find something else that's going to try to do it. And so but honestly, I view these as solvable challenges, not necessarily difficult ones. There's some much bigger ones, because these are the languages that people learn in school, for the most part, right? C, C++, JavaScript, Python, and our favorite one, Java. And these are the ones that most people use for work. C, C++, throw a little C# in there, JavaScript, Python, and our favorite, Java. What do these have in common? They're all C-style programming languages. Okay, that's kind of difficult. Right? And one of those C-style programming languages is the one that runs on .NET. It's a really good object-oriented programming language. It is often seen as the lingua franca of .NET because, like, the BCL is written in C#, so that's quite a compelling argument to convince someone to try to use C#. There's more learning resources and samples available for it, just because it's been around for a very long time, been pushed by a lot of people over a lot of years. And it has pretty good support for a small subset of functional features. So if you want to, say you're doing, quote, functional programming, you can kind of get away with a little bit of that in C# and kind of feel like you're happy. And then somebody can raise a common argument that has been brought up a lot by a lot of community members over the years, which is, why use F# when C# is good enough for me? Well, I think as F# programmers, you're probably aware that it's oftentimes not good enough for you, but making that argument against C# developers can be difficult, as I'm sure many of you had probably had experience with. So And that may make you think, okay, well, is C# uniquely smothering F#? Right? I've read a few blog posts from people that have kind of made this argument, and they've used examples like this, sort of saying, well, yes, this is sort of my proof that it's happening, and that's forever going to be a problem. I'm not quite sure I buy that one. Because if we take a look over at the greener grass in the JVM, see all those blips down at the bottom? Those are the alternative languages, Kotlin, Scala, and Clojure. I mean, this is, so to be clear, back to when I said interpreting data is very difficult. This is what Google says people find interesting, right? It's a closed system. They have not specifically said, these are the criteria, and they do not update that criteria over time, because I guarantee you they update it over time. But for their definition of what people find interesting for a programming language, Java is clearly far higher than Kotlin, Scala, and Clojure. Now, you may not experience that in your day-to-day, but sort of again, sort of the view of what you have, and the view of what I have, is not necessarily going to be an accurate representation of reality. Just as this is not necessarily an accurate representation of reality, but I could certainly imagine at, say, a Clojure conference or a Scala conference, they could be talking about trying to grow Clojure or Scala, and then say, oh, well, you know what? Java is smothering us, right? And then let's take a look at JavaScript. And we kind of got the same thing here. Note, I did not include ReasonML and BuckleScript, Fable, and that sort of stuff because Google doesn't actually recognize those as programming languages, and so this would then be an apples to oranges comparison. So I'm excluding that. The only ones that I could find that they recognized were TypeScript and Elm. And again, JavaScript is far and away higher. And part of the reasons for that is, well, JavaScript is used in code schools. It's one of the first languages that people who do any kind of just general hobbyist programming, and they don't do it for a profession, they oftentimes use JavaScript. And that's certainly part of that. So I imagine if you were able to find somehow the subset of Google searches that came from professional developers who were doing stuff in their day-to-day business, the JavaScript value would be a bit lower. And if you went back to the Java graph, you'd probably see the Java graph a bit lower too, because Java is taught in almost every single university around the world. And there's not necessarily a guarantee that those students who are using Java are going to continue using it throughout their careers. But the point remains, I don't buy the argument that C# is uniquely smothering F#. I buy the argument that functional programming is kind of difficult to grow because going back here, this is what most people learn in school, and this is what most people use for work, and it's sort of a cycle because they learn a C-style programming language in school. They say, well, these are my skills. They go to an employer. An employer will say, yes, well, you know how to use Java. We have some Java. We have some C#, but C#, Java, kind of the same, I guess. Yeah, okay, sure, we'll hire you. And I mean, those of you who are like managers or who have worked in the capacity with hiring people and bringing junior developers on, you know that the particular language that you use it's not really the hard part, right? Onboarding a new person can take a long time for reasons that are completely unrelated to the technology stack, right? If you take someone coming in from school, I mean, I graduated from college, I knew basically nothing compared to professional programmers. Most people graduating from college barely know anything compared to professional programmers, and it takes them a long time to ramp up on how to do things correctly, because they may have learned how to use C++ and Java in school, but that doesn't mean they knew how to use it correctly. And they may have to go and unlearn all of that. But that's sort of a nuanced argument. And sometimes that can be difficult to sort of get past, because I think the programming industry at large has not sort of, they've focused on language or technology stack instead of focused on things like perhaps within education, you're not educated well enough to be like truly a professional programmer, and you basically need to unlearn all sorts of different things before you can become truly productive. And so this is an industry norm that is very difficult to face. This is easily the largest challenge when it comes to F# adoption, just hands down. Nothing compares to this at all. And like most people don't learn it in school. The majority of programmers, well, the majority of programmers do not use a single language, any individual language, but F# certainly included in that. They don't use it for work. A lot of people equivocate C-style programming with programming itself. This is something that I heard in college. Took a databases course. We had to learn SQL because you use SQL to talk to a relational database. And they said, oh, why am I doing this crap? It doesn't feel like programming. And they just got done learning Python and C++, which are somewhat similar. So, and I think people can be closed-minded about that sort of stuff. And if you come across somebody who's closed-minded, unfortunately, especially if they are in sort of a management capacity, it can be just completely stifling. It ends up being something that you can almost never win. And that closed-mindedness, that's not unique to programming. People are closed-minded about everything, but it's still quite a challenge. So in the face of that, what do you do? Well, I guess it's a pragmatic approach, but basically go cross-platform first is the highest priority one, right? Windows is great. F# runs great on Windows, but not everybody uses Windows. Increasingly, people are deploying to not Windows, being focused only on Windows. Is going to leave out, just by definition, a large group of people, and that group of people is going to be growing over time. So you have to be, sort of philosophically speaking, you have to be where people are going to deploy their code. If you can't do that, well, then they're not going to use your stuff. That's really it. I want to emphasize open source and community work whenever it's possible, and doing it so judiciously and carefully without trying to stifle the work of others and without trying to make it seem like we're favoring one group over the other. This is something that I think Microsoft in particular has struggled with a lot in the past, and that's something that I personally would like to avoid, but sometimes it is inevitable and mistakes can be made. I wanted to focus on modernizing and prioritizing documentation because the #1 way that people search for a programming language or a way to do things is to use Google, and they like to come across docs that have tutorials that sort of explain things and so on. And you need to focus on SEO for that because otherwise they're not going to find your content. And then lastly, this one is sort of with supporting recent .NET innovations is something that we focused on over the past year and that we're going to continue to focus on a bit because with .NET Core, .NET as a runtime is evolving and innovating. And so as a result of that, there's sort of this momentum associated with that. There was a bit of a momentum with span of T. There's going to be a large amount of momentum starting with nullable reference types. And this is the sort of thing that, from a technical standpoint, you want to make sure that you can talk to these new constructs, right? Even if you never use it, if you come across it by referencing it in a DLL, it's nice to not have your code explode. But what this does allow is that from a growth standpoint, Microsoft marketing can basically say C# and F# support XYZ, right? This is something that's important because they have a lot more reach than just me, an individual person working at the company does. So there's been a few rewards from those challenges to share, which are kind of cool, so I'm kind of happy about that. So last year, if we compare this year from last year in terms of what we can measure from external users of Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code with Ionide, deduped across both of them, which is a recent capability that we have. Speaking of difficulty with counting, we saw 32% year-over-year growth, which is good. Quite happy about that. I would obviously like that number to be higher, but when your goal is to make number more go big, if the number can go big according to the laws of mathematics, then of course you'd like to see that improve. But I'm very happy about this. And then I mentioned the intersection here. 12% of total Ionide and 7% of total VS are sort of effectively measured as the same person. So there are plenty of people out there who use both tools. I am one of them. But what this does tell me is that both seem to appeal to different crowds of people, which I'm quite happy about because that means that F# can be used in contexts that are not limited to just the single product offering that Microsoft has been pushing for its developers for a long time, right? With Visual Studio, right? Your option is not Visual Studio on Windows. You can do whatever you want. You can use JetBrains Writer if you like. It's amazing to be able to have that. I obviously can't measure JetBrains Writer because it's a separate company's product, so I have no idea what that looks like, but I assume things are going well. F# docs are now modernized-ish. They're not quite there. The F# core API reference still needs to be up there, and that has some it has some discoverability issues because there's some old MSDN links that people look at, and MSDN is sort of not viewed that well anymore. But the conceptual documentation, it's growing. We got high overall CSAT scores overall, which is just a measurement of if people are, if they have a little annoying little survey that says, do you like this document, yes or no? And some people click no because they don't like the actual question, but the majority of people say yes. I am the kind of person who always clicks no because I got the question, but you know, we're doing okay. F# is mentioned alongside C# by Microsoft and has online presences where people expect it. One case right here is the .NET homepage has a little Microsoft banner right there, pretty important for SEO. It's just mentioned, it's the open source cross-platform functional language for .NET. This is on the new .NET homepage, this is F# has a place there. This is not, you know, hooray, success, we did it, but this is people expect things to be there, and so we are there, and that was a very deliberate effort. The same thing going on with new docs. So docs.microsoft.com is sort of this new initiative to replace MSDN, and the expectation is that F# is a part of that, and that F# looks good on that, and that's still a work in progress. It's honestly going to be an everlasting work in progress, but it is something that is there. It is something that has improved dramatically over the past year, and that I'm quite happy about. So that's sort of rounding out the user growth stuff, but I also want to talk a little bit more about tools because this is where things get much more interesting in my opinion. Speaking of, I don't know if the mic picked this up, but when I was at Build this year presenting on why you should use F#, I had a little mic right here, and I glugged a whole bunch of water. And if you watch it like the 32-minute mark or so, you just hear this, and it's just, it's great. And yeah, a coworker pointed that out to me, and I was ecstatic. Okay, so when I say tooling challenges, F# tooling is cross-platform, but the number one problem that people have been having with F# tooling in the past has been Visual Studio tooling, like for a long, long time. And sort of the roundabout top ones, sort of observing what was going on when I first joined, was that infrastructure had just decayed. It was just bit rot, a little hack here, there, bit rot, little hack here, bit rot, just not proper at all, and that produced massive amounts of problems that I'll detail a bit later. Number one thing, not enough features in the box with Visual Studio support. Language service integration was just doing too much stuff when it really shouldn't be doing it. It was too large in scope, and when too many things are too large in scope, it becomes very difficult for an engineering team to handle it appropriately. It's also very difficult for open source contributors to contribute to the code base, and we have a large amount of people who are interested in contributing, and they would try to do it and give up because it was too hard. Project and solution integration was just honestly kind of a poor quality, too large in scope to reasonably evolve, really big code base. And Visual Studio and .NET Core release cycles was really difficult for us, and we're now sort of at a pretty happy place where we can manage things appropriately. We know sort of how to go through everything, but there was a lot of learning processes involved, not just for us, but for other teams, and that was a really big deal, especially over the past year. So on the infrastructure side, we used to have unreliable builds that took days when I first joined. This is in like literally days to produce a binary that could live inside of Visual Studio, and maybe it would work. Like that's just not good. And open source, the open source repository was not the actual source of truth for what shipped inside of Visual Studio, which is highly confusing to people. And that's because localization support and a few other things were done internally with internal systems, and there were various hacks to sort of get it to work, and that was just difficult. From an open source contribution standpoint, the dependency chain was terrible. You had to download gigabytes of stuff on your machine just to be able to write a single line of code that would compile. I imagine we lost half of any interested open source contributors for a long, long time just because of that alone. There was no ability to flight new tools and compilers. So if you were an open source contributor who really stuck with it and you got a new feature in there, maybe somebody would be able to use your feature in a year. That was kind of the state of it, and that's really demotivating as someone who contributed something, just not being able to see people use it. Our language service did not match the f#.compiler.service language service. Like, it's the same overall underlying logic, like it's the same compiler, but it was not the same API shape. There were some differences between the two, and that's just silly. Global deployment of Visual Studio binaries with no versioning is pretty great, especially when you update Visual Studio or install a preview, and it would just upgrade what you got without you telling it to do that. That would cause all sorts of little subtle bugs, and that was something that was just sort of solved recently. And then our cross-platform build still has some Project JSON in it, but we're very close to eliminating that. But this is a really tall mountain to tackle from an infrastructure standpoint. Lack of features, it's just like features, right? Visual Studio with F# support had gone quite a few years with basically the same sets of features. This was the top complaint every single release. And this is the top problem in selling F# to C# and Java developers, right? Because C# developers would see, they'd had plenty of productivity features, and Java developers, same deal. They use IntelliJ, plenty of productivity features in there. And then only about 10%, it's a little less than 10, but I just slightly rounded up, of measured users even used the Visual F# power tools that added these productivity features. And that, because it's a third-party extension, by definition, the majority of people are just not going to use it. That's, sometimes it's due to a rule, like in somebody's organization, that you cannot use a third-party extension, but usually it's just because most people don't know it exists. And kind of a weird messaging problem for those who did use it, which is I had to install a third-party extension to get like rename or find all references. Why is this not in the box? And the answer is, gee, that's a really good question. That's really, really difficult. That language service integration stuff that I talked about, it ultimately used a really old UI, and at the same time when Roslyn shipped with VS 2015, there was a whole bunch of new UI that was so much easier to update, and a lot of like nice common infrastructure and stuff like that that the C# and VB team had built, and F# was not using any of that. Old dependencies hurt our infrastructure. So like to improve our infrastructure, we would have to improve this part of integration because we could not move other parts of our build further and so on. And the abstractions were not very good. If you wanted to add a feature, you would have to basically handle everything yourself, know the VS APIs and stuff like that, when honestly there was just no good reason for that to exist. And from the layering standpoint, there were a bunch of useful tests that would call into this stuff, and they were not actually testing this, they were testing the underlying language service, but they would call the language service through this rather than call the language service directly. And so it's something that you can't just get rid of, because otherwise all the unit tests that do useful things are not passing anymore. So this is a difficult one. From an open source standpoint, that machine state dependencies are everywhere. You need to install, depending on the time, anywhere from like 10 to 4 gigabytes on your machine to do anything. That's just not fun. A lot of that code was old that you had to work with, lacked documentation. There wasn't really, a common set of APIs or other teams that had been using these sorts of things. And kind of as I said, if you wanted to wire something up yourself, you had to do all the work to plumb it through. And it was just not set up very well. And then, yeah, you contributed something successfully, hooray. Maybe people see it in 6 months, maybe a year. That's demotivating. And so open source contributors say, okay, well, do I really want to do this? It's a good question. Project integration standpoint, this is built on an older system. See, this is kind of a common sort of thing here as I drop plastic. Whoops. This thing is actually the largest source of F# package load issues in Visual Studio. If you've ever experienced one of those where it's a little assertion that says F# package could not load, came from this piece of crap. I call it that because it's, oh my God, compared to what we have for .NET Core SDK projects, it's absolutely night and day. It's a really huge code base, really large in scope, and fundamentally we're not project system engineers. Where we work with language and compiler tooling. That's a very, very different discipline than working with project system integration, yet we sort of had to own also the project system integration, and that's something that doesn't scale very well. And it was incapable of supporting .NET Core projects at the time that .NET Core was ramping up, so kind of a problem if you want to use .NET Core, right? And just overall, the set of features, the performance, the reliability, just sort of everything is just 5+, maybe 6 years behind the current state of the art with what had been being built for C# and Visual Basic. And then prior to .NET Core, every single F# user used this thing. So you can't just get rid of it, because then that breaks every single person. So kind of difficult. kind of on a different front, at the same time, a new project system was being built for .NET SDK style. If you've used it, I'm sure you've enjoyed the fact that you can edit the project file without having to unload the project and then reload the project. And there's a pretty large team working behind this, and they specialize in project system integration, and they've been doing tons and tons of performance work incrementally over the time, and that's still their #1 charter, is to make performance as good as possible. And this is something that it actually works with F# projects, so it's like, oh yes, let's just have all F# projects work in that. Well, that's to be done. Talk about that a bit later, but it's the majority of existing F# code still uses the old system, and there's no automated migration tooling, so that's also a problem. Additionally, the file ordering stuff was not implemented in the system, and that's something that F# users need. And file ordering was a ton of work, months of work. Eugene over there has had experience, and yes, sorry, we have two Eugenes. I'm referring to the one behind the first one. He has had experience, the lovely experience of doing things like file ordering in an IDE, and I'm sure he could tell you that it's a real fun time. There are edge cases within edge cases, and unfortunately it is one of those things where unless every single one of those is supported, it's one of those things where it goes from useless, workable. There's no sort of incremental, oh, this is kind of nice. It's terrible until it's not terrible, and that's sort of the way that file ordering sort of works. There are a few features that are just kind of like that, and that just meant we had to spend a few months of just doing that, and those were 3 months that could have been spent doing nice things that could have incrementally made people happier, and well, that was a challenge. So. Shipping was also difficult, as I'm sure those of you with VS 2017 have noticed. It ships a lot faster than older versions of VS 2017, lots more updates. And the .NET Core ship cycle is completely orthogonal to the VS 2017. Basically, if there's a stable version of an SDK, it goes into the next version. But there can be stable versions of the SDK that ship completely independently. And if we want to get F# changes to the compiler in, then we need to be able to balance that with 2 different teams with 2 different ship cycles. And within Visual Studio, we have to support the current release for like servicing, things like that, the next version, and then the next version. And we need to just constantly be flowing code through there. And that's something that took a long time to sort of work out. We did not have the infrastructure to support this in early days. And that really made life difficult. Now we do, and it's wonderful. But it's still kind of difficult. You always got to think about, okay, we fixed this. Where is this going? When is this going in? It can be kind of hard. And then cross-team infrastructure initiatives happened because we were not the only team that had a lot of learning to do with how to ship a lot faster. And so to support that, there were internal infrastructure improvements that had to be made. And to be able to onboard to making everything better for everyone, you have to take time away from what you would like to do to make this thing work. And that was difficult. So, and then in the earlier days, we actually broke the XML colorization if you were using the dark theme for a few users, and that's just one of those things where like there was a risk of breaking people with things in the early days that it got worked out, and it's not really that much of a risk anymore, but this was a problem that made it much more difficult to ship things. And lastly, I think honestly a lot of customers have just not gotten used to that fast ship cycle yet. I think a lot of people, especially a lot of larger organizations, have built up sort of this cadence with dealing with updates that was shifted with VS 2017, and having to deal with that is a challenge. This is not a Microsoft challenge, this is a customer challenge, and this is something that was sort of pushed, and I think it's gotten a lot better, but it's, I call it out. So, in the face of that, we have a few goals. By hook or by crook, we will modernize F# tooling in Visual Studio. I shouldn't say by hook or by crook, because that implies that you'd like steal things. No, nothing illegal. But yeah, the language service integration stuff that I talked about, that just had to go. The Roslyn team built out something that was good, really, really good. And not using that is just like crazy. Making open source contributions easier was a massive, massive high point that we had to make sure that we could do, because we just saw too much open source activity just getting halted due to the difficulty of working in the code base, and that was just not acceptable, I think. Visual F# Power Tools features, we wanted to take that 10% figure to 100%, right? Make things there, make them on by default, make it so that people could use them, make it so that people could say, yes, there are productivity features. That came almost entirely from the open source community porting things over, and we're extremely, extremely grateful for that. Wanted to remove the cruft from our build and internal bits that slow us down and make it easier for people to use our language service infrastructure. So the plan, the great plan. Great things happen with plans is they never work out exactly the way that you initially want them to. Replace the language service integration stuff with Roslyn workspace components. Prioritize open source contributions. Take 10 years of infrastructure debt, tackle it, pay it off. It takes 2 years to do that. Work with project system integration team to fully bring up the F# support for .NET Core SDK stuff, and kind of plan out how to eventually have all projects open with that. And then still keep prioritizing .NET Core support, make sure that it works in Visual Studio, and always be shipping. Those are just sort of the things, just always doing that. And things change over time, but we did see some rewards from that, and I think people did as well. We went from unreliable builds that took days to reliable builds that take 90 minutes. Our builds are fully reproducible now. They are exactly where we want them to be. Well, we could make that 90-minute figure go down more if we want, but within 90 minutes you can get a nightly release of Visual Studio popping open if you're onto the nightly feed. We think that's pretty good. The open source repository is now the actual source of truth for shipping code. What you see in that repository is literally what ships inside of Visual Studio. If something like all the localization stuff, all that sort of stuff, it's all there. The dependency chain for open source contributors is a lot smaller. There's still a little bit, but it's gone from tens of gigabytes to not tens of gigabytes, which is pretty big. And it was kind of an obscure set of gigabytes that you had to install, and now it's fairly straightforward. We have a nightly release that flights both tooling and now compiler changes. The F# compiler service project that is used by other editors can be built directly from our code base because it's basically the same as the original F# compiler service. So Christoph can say, well, I need to update Ionide because a new feature got immediately merged in and I really want people to use that right now. He can just pop into the code base, build it and include it and ship Ionide. He does not have to wait for one of us to update the package. I think that's a pretty big deal. There's still improvements to go from there, but the fact that that's possible is a rather big deal in my opinion. We deploy our binaries that were in a global location now side by side. They are versioned appropriately. That caused some headaches. Sorry for those who experienced those headaches. I hope they're mostly resolved. But this is a much better world because now you are not implicitly upgraded without you necessarily knowing that you upgraded yourself. So the last remaining hurdle on that front is to move our build to the .NET SDK. Then we can have an actually true cross-platform build. This has been something that I wanted for the past 2 years, and it's about to happen, which makes me very happy. The Visual Studio side, the majority of Visual F# Power Tools features have been ported by the community, basically the people who wrote those features. And there's been some new ones that have been added along the way. Most of them are on by default and usable for 100% of people who use F# and Visual Studio. This is in very, very sharp contrast to the way that things were before. Now we get bug reports. Instead of saying, where are the tools? They're saying, why are the tools have these issues? But that's a place where I want it to be, right? That's so much of a better place. It's a huge influx of open source contributors. A lot of people have been quite new. We actually saw, I think he might be one of my favorites, Jacob Majoka. He knows how to fight MEF. He knows the differences between MEF1 and MEF2, and he's able to submit open source pull requests that do things correctly with managed extensibility framework. I don't know of any other open source contributor who knows how to do that correctly on the first go. So that's pretty cool. The code base, it's just so much easier to add things and modify things and move things around, and more importantly, move things from a layer that is Visual Studio only to moving things to a layer that is F# compiler service so that it can be used by other editors for people who are not using Visual Studio. We onboarded .NET Core support with the .NET SDK, and so it's backed by a full team, which is pretty great, who specializes in project systems. And so when you're using .NET Core SDK style solutions, it's just basically everything seems to work a lot better. That's just really the only way that it is. We have a technical path that we've sort of established for migrating all F# projects to that new project system integration that is feasible with Visual Studio 2019, and we're going to do this very carefully because it affects the majority of F# programmers, but we think it is necessary because we just get lots and lots of reports over time with this older system that just, it really needs to go. And F# needs to be on the new system that is built by people who want to support F# and they are experts in supporting languages like this at a project system level. So that's sort of a big thing there. On the shipping side, if you've been using the nightly release, you can get stuff every 90 minutes potentially. It's not quite like that, but usually there's a new nightly every day or every couple of days whenever something gets merged into master. The reality is that it's just now a steady stream of improvements come with updates. You can use new things a lot faster than you could before. And what I'm really happy about is that open source contributors can see people actually use the features that they added within weeks or months, not within years. That is such a big difference for people who give us work for free. I'm really, really happy about that. And iNide and other editors can use stuff on the same day after we release something. You don't, like, Christoph does not have to wait for a magic package to be published. He can take care of it himself if he needs to, and that's a big improvement. So there's a lot more to go. We have a lot more performance work to do. We focused on that a bit with some past updates, but what we have to do now is we need to establish sort of a rebaselining of F# performance under various workloads and sort of say, okay, these are the performance statistics that we have here. Sort of, do we go a route of giving you more memory to work with, or do we go a route of just reducing memory usage all up, which is easier in the short term and the long term, which is probably, there's that sort of stuff, but that's top of mind for us there. There are still a few fragile pieces that they need to be made less fragile. That's actually our top item right now, is to just harden that stuff up, because there have been a few breaks in that space, and it's been a slight source of unreliability that we just want to get rid of. We see ourselves as needing to do a much better job with validation all up. We have very good validation for .NET Core and .NET Core SDK style projects. We have a variety of open source projects that we sort of build and run in a build lab. But there's more to F# programming than just that. And so this is something that we've been brainstorming recently about things that we can do, things that we can automate, and working with other teams and sort of vendors to sort of say, okay, like, here are the steps that you can do to sort of create certain types of projects, mix and match .NET Framework with .NET Core, kind of see how things go. So, and then that project integration stuff that I keep talking about, it has to work for all F# projects. This is a really, really big long-term thing that we want to accomplish, that we need to accomplish, and we're going to accomplish. So, but I just wanted to say that's a bunch of Visual Studio stuff, blah, blah, blah. The best reward for all of these challenges, which can seem quite daunting sometimes, is being able to talk to, interact with, and have friends in the F# community. Right, you are all, for the most part, very excited to use and try new things that are done, new things that we do. And it's really great, because basically the instant we do something, we sort of have this line of people saying, yes, please let me use it right now. Let me give you feedback on this. And people who are very excited to give that sort of feedback. Yeah, you're an incredibly diverse group of people. You come from a lot of different backgrounds, and you can give us sort of like a really good view into sort of what's important for you. And you've demonstrated a pretty strong willingness to put up with some of the great growing pains that we've had, and some of the problems that we've had, and dealing with bugs, dealing with performance issues, things like that. And that's something that we're extremely, extremely grateful for, because We know that we can continue to improve and do so many things better, and we know that we can get there, and we're happy that you are patient and willing to see us through that, which is really, really great. And just on things that are independently of our work, things like Fable just absolutely astound us. I think actually Fable compiler has more stars on GitHub than Visual F# now, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, good job, Alfonso. And contributors, it's not just Alfonso. Like Maxime, who he had mentioned a whole bunch of times. The guy's incredible. Oh my God, I could never imagine doing things like strongly typed programming against CSS that's like as elegant as it is. Or Elmish, like with what, first Eugene, I'll say here, I sort of said, it's a beautiful UI programming model. This is something that I don't think we ever could have come up with. This is something that came out of the community. It's amazing. And so this is just, I don't know, we're really proud that you use the things that we build, and just, far and away the best part of doing this is being able to interact with you all. At least that's my opinion. So, thank you. Do I have time for questions or no? Yes, I do? Really? I thought I ran over. Oh, crap. Okay. Well, thanks for staying late. Do have a question back there? Yes.
Yes, two questions. One is, you did mention tooling support around type providers. Is that something you're also working on, or is that a done feature?
Okay, so the question is more tooling support around type providers, or is that a done feature, and that being something that was not called out in the slides. I think the door is open for more tooling support for type providers. In particular, the authoring of type providers that use the type provider SDK to take a dependency on third-party DLLs, basically be able to have those design time DLLs have a dependency on third-party DLLs is something that still needs to be done and sort of fleshed out properly, because this will enable a larger set of type providers to be able to come to .NET Core. Now, as far as tooling is concerned, this is actually quite challenging because by using type providers, you inherit, your code base and your build inherits every single failure mode of the data source that you point it to. That's the trade-off with type providers, right? They're massively amazing things, but that can be a problem. And so honestly, I don't have a good answer for how to deal with that problem, because you could be pointing something at it. So that's sort of the thing that I view as like one of the top problems with, and one of the biggest challenges with using type providers, like performance, and just, performance can be so variable. So there are some places that we can improve. We actually did some work based off of a trace that a community member sent us, where 50% of his CPU time was spent on GC pauses, and about 76 or so % of that GP pause time was coming from string allocations from a single function in the F# compiler that came from provided types being generated in a completion list. And that was because I can only surmise that he was pointing something at a relatively flat data structure, and it had a ton of information that was coming in. And so we looked at that code, and it was fairly straightforward to make better, and we reduced the memory consumption by an order of magnitude. So in his particular case, it should be much more performant, and he should have a better tooling experience using type providers. But that's, at that level, I think, is sort of where we're seeing it. I personally don't have a vision for the improvement of type providers today. Well, beyond just incrementally making things better. And then you mentioned that you had a second question. Oh, sorry. Oh, geez.
Awesome.
Thank you. Oh, well. I may take another question or so, but I'll eat it later. And but yes, it is my birthday today, so thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, second question.
One of the things you might 2, 3 years old. You have the same help with that one?
I'd like to say yes. Honestly, I'm not sure if I have the capacity for that. I think in some cases it's gotten better, like with compositional IT doing training for like the safe stack and things like that. But I don't know. I view that as a thing that I'm realistically, I think. I don't really know. I view it as something like, yes, I would like to improve that. I don't know if I can actually give you a commitment that I could help improve that beyond sort of reaching out to people who are doing this sort of third-party training and sort of saying, hey, do you need some help with any new material or something like that? So that's kind of my answer. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Solution files are the solution for all ways to do data transfer, in my opinion. No, solution files are awful. I don't know. I think it's something that we may eventually get to, because I guarantee you nobody at Microsoft really loves those things. They're not particularly toolable, and the tooling within Visual Studio 4 solution level configuration is not particularly great either. You can do like 2 or 3 things with it, and that's it. It's something that we look at and we go, yeah, we really want to fix that. I don't know when that would be though, but I personally would really like to fix it, and I actually am in a bit of a role where I can be influential in that a little bit. It's just I think there are some other things that are a bit more pressing, like being able to add a language service to MS Build, so that project editing is a lot better. So, more questions? Yes? Okay, I saw someone behind you. He raised his hand just barely faster than you did, and then I will get to you. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question is cross-language between C# and F# IDE tooling. Not on the current roadmap, although we do support go to definition from F# to C#, but the inverse is not supported. Find references, rename, that sort of stuff is not on there either. Neither code base is particularly set up to do that at this point in time, so it's a significant investment that would have to be made on both parts to enable that. There may be interesting things in the long-term future that I can neither really talk about in detail nor give many hints about, but this is, I mean, the C# to F# thing is a special case of cross-language in general, because, I mean, a lot of C# developers have C++ in their solutions, and they need to interact. Maybe they're using C++ CLI, and like, how do you have a good experience with that? This is a well-understood problem and something that has been looked at before and will be continued to be looking at. It's something that is, I can't talk about it further, I'm sorry. It's on our minds. Okay, I believe I had a question there, and then I will get to Chet. Yes?
I just wondered how many, like the major Microsoft conferences, how much F#, how much interest are you seeing? When you go to like a build, or you go to the lives, or the and I come to open F# because there's like nothing.
So at Build, we usually get a pretty decent amount of people coming to the language booth asking about F#, and then the people who are there who are not me wonder why I'm not there. Because there actually is quite a bit of interest for people at Build. At Ignite, I heard that there was interest last year, and in reaction to that, I created a sort of like a little cheat sheet for people who wanted to understand F# from like a very beginner standpoint, because the Ignite is happening right now, so I couldn't be in both places. So I gave that to people there, 250 copies, and I think they burned through about 100 or so. So that's pretty decent for a language booth, about 100 people trying to pick up one of those things. I don't know about live, I've never been there. What other conferences? Yeah, I've only ever been to Build. We do see quite a few people because the language booth says C#, F#, Visual Basic, and then a lot of people come up and say, F#, I see that you have it listed there, tell me more. That's oftentimes the level that we're at. And so actually the past 2 years I have been, in my opinion, ill prepared for that, which is why at Ignite I sent things for the people manning that booth. But I wasn't there, so I couldn't actually tell people. But for Build, I'm going to be doing a similar thing. Sort of the goal is giving people like a cheat sheet or sort of a brochure who are sort of unfamiliar with F#, and sort of say, like, take this home. It's got a link in there, like a really big link that says, here's where you go download F# with .NET Core. Here's like the first little bit of code that you can write. Here are additional resources to learn some more. This is something that I think has not been done at past Microsoft conferences like at the language booth, so that's something that I'm personally trying to change. I didn't mention it in the talk, but that is sort of additionally on the space of trying to grow more F# users, something that I've been focusing on. So cool. And then Chet. Last question. All right, make it good.
All right. So we've had since the inception of F#, we've had F# compiler service. It's used across all those languages. I know you're a big fan of other languages, especially Golang. They have a feature that came out recently where they're bundling a language server in Trump, like an actual, language server as in the language server spec. Is there any interest or potential pathway in that potentially being something that VS Sharp or not VS Sharp, but could be bundled with compiler?
Well, kind of on that front, I view the language server protocol as the long-term future for languages within Visual Studio and other tools. I'm not speaking from that like from a point of authority, but that just seems like the obvious way to go. It's architected correctly, in my opinion, and that's just the things that need to happen. They need to do some work to get it so that it can support the same feature set that Visual Studio has, because we can't just onboard directly and then miss a variety of features. But I think that's something that when the time comes, we will definitely try to do the work for, because, well, first we need to be able to take F# out of process because it's designed to sort of be an out of process thing, but then, okay, if you're out of process and you can fit with this thing that was architected for a language service that is out of process by people who really, really know what they're doing, it just behooves us to do it. So I will view that as a high priority thing to do once the time comes that we can do that without losing any features that we have today. Cool. That's the last. So thank you very much.